When you hear the words, the Mad King, one image immediately comes to mind. A man with long tangled hair, filthy fingernails, wild eyes, screaming one phrase over and over again, "Burn them all!" He's remembered as one of the most terrifying rulers in the history of Westeros, the king whose madness destroyed an entire dynasty and started the events that would eventually lead to Game of Thrones. But King Aerys II wasn't born insane. He wasn't always cruel or paranoid. In fact, when he was young, many believed he would become one of the greatest Targaryen kings ever to sit on the Iron Throne. He was charming, handsome, and ambitious, with powerful friends, loyal supporters, and every opportunity to leave behind a golden age. How does a promising young prince become a king who burns innocent people alive? How does someone go from being admired by the realm to becoming known forever as the Mad King? Today, we're going through his entire life story, from his birth all the way to his final moments on the Iron Throne. This story is even more tragic than most people realize. King Aerys II was born in 244 AC. He was the son of Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen and Princess Shera Targaryen. Just like many Targaryens before them, his parents were brother and sister. At the time, the Iron Throne was ruled by his grandfather, King Aegon V, whom you probably know better as Egg from A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Unlike many kings before him, King Aegon genuinely cared about the small folk and wanted to improve their lives. But trying to balance the interests of commoners and powerful lords created enemies on every side. Growing up in this environment, young Aerys experienced both the privilege of royalty and the enormous pressure that came with it. From an early age, he showed signs of intelligence, enjoyed court life, loved attention, and dreamed of becoming a legendary king. Nothing about his childhood suggested he would one day become the Mad King. If anything, people thought he had enormous potential. One of the most important relationships in his entire life began when he was still young, a friendship with a boy named Tywin Lannister. This is the very same Tywin who would later become the feared lord of Casterly Rock and the father of Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion. As children, the two became incredibly close. They trained, studied, and laughed together. Many believed their friendship would define an entire generation. No one could have imagined that one day they would become bitter enemies. Like many Targaryen princes before him, Aerys didn't marry for love. He married because his family expected it. His bride was his own sister, Princess Rhaella. Neither of them wanted the marriage. According to the histories, they were forced into it by King Aegon V after a prophecy claimed that the prince that was promised would come from their bloodline. Whether that prophecy was true or not, it shaped the future of Westeros forever. Their marriage wasn't a happy one. Even early on, there were arguments, tension, and moments of cruelty. But compared to what would happen later, these were only small cracks beginning to form. Everything changed after the tragedy at Summerhall. Summerhall was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became one of the greatest disasters in Targaryen history. King Aegon V died, Prince Duncan died, and many members of House Targaryen perished in a mysterious fire that has never been fully explained. Ironically, during the same tragedy, a baby was born, Prince Rhaegar, the son of King Aerys II and Queen Rhaella. From his very first breath, Rhaegar's life became linked with fire, prophecy, and tragedy. After Summerhall, Aerys's father eventually became king, though his reign was short. When he died, the crown passed to his son. Just like that, the young prince everyone admired became King Aerys II, ruler of the Seven Kingdoms. The realm celebrated and people were optimistic, as a new king often meant a fresh beginning. During those first years, things actually went very well. King Aerys II was energetic. He spoke about building magnificent cities, constructing massive roads, and creating monuments that would outshine anything built before. He dreamed big, sometimes too big. Many of his ideas were unrealistic, but people admired his ambition because it showed a king who wanted greatness. The real reason those early years succeeded, however, wasn't because of the king alone. It was because of the man standing beside him, Tywin Lannister. King Aerys II appointed his childhood friend as Hand of the King, which turned out to be one of the smartest decisions he would ever make. Tywin was everything a hand should be: disciplined, brilliant, and efficient. While the king dreamed, Tywin got things done. He restored order, improved the kingdom's finances, strengthened royal authority, and brought stability to Westeros. Under the two of them, the Seven Kingdoms entered one of their most prosperous periods in decades. People praised the king, merchants grew wealthier, crime decreased, and the royal treasury filled with gold. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but behind the scenes, a dangerous problem was beginning to grow: jealousy. At first, King Aerys II appreciated Tywin's abilities, but over time, he started noticing that whenever people talked about the success of the kingdom, they weren't praising him. They were praising Tywin. Nobles admired Tywin, soldiers respected Tywin, and even foreign rulers spoke highly of him. The whispers slowly reached the king: Tywin is the real ruler, and the king only wears the crown. Imagine hearing that over and over, especially if you desperately wanted history to remember you as a great king. Instead of feeling proud that his closest friend was so capable, King Aerys II became insecure, and insecurity is one of the most dangerous emotions a king can have. Little by little, he began trying to prove that he was greater than Tywin. He interrupted meetings, ignored good advice, and made decisions simply because they were the opposite of what Tywin recommended. Not because they were better, but because they reminded everyone who wore the crown. This was the beginning of something much darker, because once a ruler starts making decisions based on pride instead of wisdom, the kingdom always pays the price. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of King Aerys II's descent into madness. By the time people started noticing something was wrong, it wasn't obvious. There wasn't one single day where King Aerys II woke up and became the Mad King. Instead, it happened slowly. It happened almost so slowly that the people around him didn't realize how much he had changed until it was too late. Madness didn't arrive overnight. It crept into his life, one disappointment, one humiliation, and one fear at a time. One of the biggest sources of pain in King Aerys II's life was his family, more specifically, the children he never got to raise. King Aerys II and Queen Rhaella had numerous pregnancies, but heartbreak followed them again and again. Several children were either stillborn or died shortly after birth. Imagine the emotional toll of losing child after child. Every celebration turned into mourning, and every hope ended in grief. Eventually, only 3 of their children would survive into adulthood: Prince Rhaegar, Prince Viserys, and much later, Princess Daenerys, who wouldn't even be born until after her father's death. Each loss left emotional scars, and as the years passed, the king became convinced that fate itself was working against him. Sadly, those personal tragedies didn't bring the king and queen closer together. If anything, their marriage became even worse. King Aerys II grew increasingly cruel toward Queen Rhaella. He humiliated her in front of members of the court and blamed her for things she couldn't control. Even members of the Kingsguard, men sworn never to interfere, were said to feel pity for the queen because of how badly she was treated. It became painfully clear that this wasn't the loving royal couple the realm had hoped for. Inside the Red Keep, the royal family was falling apart. At the same time, the king's relationship with Tywin Lannister continued to deteriorate. The more successful Tywin became, the more insecure the king became. It reached the point where compliments toward Tywin felt like personal insults. Whenever someone praised the hand, the king heard criticism of himself. He started believing that Tywin was trying to outshine him on purpose. Of course, there was very little evidence that Tywin actually wanted the throne. Tywin wanted power, influence, and respect, but those aren't the same as wanting to be king. The problem was, King Aerys II slowly stopped caring about evidence. He began trusting his suspicions more than reality. Then there was Prince Rhaegar. Today, Rhaegar is remembered as one of the most fascinating Targaryens who ever lived. He wasn't interested in tournaments as a child. He preferred books, ancient scrolls, prophecies, and music. People often described him as quiet, thoughtful, and unusually intelligent, but eventually he transformed himself into a brilliant warrior as well. The realm admired him, and some even adored him. That created another problem for the king, because now it wasn't just Tywin receiving praise. His own son was becoming more popular than he was. Imagine being a king who desperately wants to be remembered as legendary, only to hear whispers that your son would make a far better ruler. Those whispers began eating away at his mind. Before long, King Aerys II started seeing enemies everywhere. A conversation between two nobles? Maybe they were plotting against him. A lord arriving late to court? Maybe it was a sign of disrespect. Someone laughing across the hall? Surely they were laughing at the king. The court became a place filled with suspicion. People watched what they said, avoided jokes, and chose every word carefully because no one knew what might offend the king on any given day. Living in King's Landing became like walking across thin ice. One wrong step and everything could shatter. The king also developed an unhealthy obsession with wildfire. If you've only watched Game of Thrones, you probably know wildfire as the bright green liquid capable of destroying entire armies. But during King Aerys II's reign, it became something far more dangerous. He loved it, not just as a weapon, but almost as a symbol of his power. Watching wildfire burn fascinated him. The explosions, the heat, the destruction. Executions by fire became increasingly common. Instead of simple beheadings, the king preferred flames. He wanted people to suffer. He wanted them to be afraid. And every time another prisoner burned alive, the court grew a little quieter. Around this time, a new figure began gaining influence inside the Red Keep. A man known simply as Varys, the master of whisperers. A man with spies hidden across Westeros and beyond. Children, servants, merchants, sailors. His little birds seemed to hear everything. King Aerys II loved this. The more paranoid he became, the more he relied on information, or at least what he believed was information, reports of possible conspiracies, rumors, whispers, and half-truths. Instead of calming the king, these constant reports fed his fears. Every rumor became another reason not to trust the people around him. Ironically, the more secrets he learned, the less secure he felt. Then came another moment that pushed his friendship with Tywin even closer to breaking. Tywin wanted his daughter, Cersei, to marry Prince Rhaegar. From Tywin's perspective, it made perfect sense. The heir to the throne marrying the daughter of the Hand would strengthen the kingdom and unite two incredibly powerful families. But King Aerys II didn't simply reject the idea. He mocked it publicly. He suggested that the daughter of a servant, even a powerful servant, wasn't worthy of marrying a prince of royal blood. Imagine hearing that after serving the king faithfully for nearly 20 years. For Tywin, it was deeply humiliating. The friendship that had once seemed unbreakable was now hanging by a thread. Meanwhile, the king himself was changing physically. He stopped caring about his appearance. His hair grew longer and longer, his beard became tangled, and his fingernails were allowed to grow until they resembled claws. Some servants became afraid just standing near him. Others claimed he smelled of sweat, smoke, and neglect. He no longer looked like the handsome prince people had once admired. He looked haunted, as though the fears inside his mind were beginning to show on the outside. But despite all of this, despite the paranoia, despite the cruelty, despite the growing instability, there was still a chance things could have been different. There was still one event that hadn't happened, one moment that would permanently destroy whatever remained of the king's sanity, a single decision that would turn a troubled ruler into the mad king history would never forget. It happened in a town called Duskendale, and after what happened there, King Aerys II would never be the same again. If you ask most historians in Westeros, when did King Aerys II truly become the Mad King? Most of them would give you the same answer: the Defiance of Duskendale. Because everything you've heard so far, the jealousy, the paranoia, the cruelty, those were warning signs. But Duskendale was the moment his mind finally broke. To understand what happened, we first need to talk about the town itself. Duskendale was one of the oldest ports in the Seven Kingdoms. For centuries, it had been an important trading town ruled by House Darklyn. But as King's Landing grew into the largest city in Westeros, Duskendale slowly lost much of its wealth and influence, and its rulers weren't happy about that. Lord Dennis Darklyn believed the Iron Throne had treated his house unfairly, wanting lower taxes, greater privileges, and more independence. Normally, disputes like this would be handled by the hand of the king, and Tywin Lannister had already begun preparing a military response. But King Aerys II had other ideas. He wanted to prove something. He wanted to show everyone that he didn't need Tywin to solve his problems. So, against Tywin's advice, the king personally traveled to Duskendale with only a relatively small escort. It was one of the worst decisions he would ever make. The moment King Aerys II entered the castle, the trap was sprung. Lord Dennis Darklyn seized him, and just like that, the king of the Seven Kingdoms became a prisoner. The royal guards were killed or captured, the castle gates were sealed, and suddenly, the most powerful man in Westeros was completely at the mercy of his captors. Back in King's Landing, chaos erupted. The realm had never faced a situation quite like this. Tywin Lannister immediately surrounded Duskendale with thousands of soldiers, prepared to storm the town if necessary. But there was one problem. If the attack failed, the king would almost certainly die, so everyone waited. One day became a week became a month, and King Aerys II remained imprisoned for nearly 6 months. Imagine that. A king who had once commanded an entire continent, locked inside a room by one rebellious lord, left with only fear. We don't know everything that happened during those months, as the histories aren't clear, but when King Aerys II finally emerged, he wasn't the same man. Not even close. Eventually, Tywin reached a grim conclusion. Negotiations had failed, and the castle would have to be stormed. But before the attack could begin, a young knight of the Kingsguard, Barristan Selmy, volunteered for what everyone believed was a suicide mission. Even today, Barristan is remembered as one of the greatest knights in the history of Westeros, and what he did at Duskendale is one of the reasons why. Instead of leading an army through the front gates, he slipped into the castle alone under the cover of darkness. He silently fought his way through the defenses, found the king, and somehow escaped with him alive. Without Barristan Selmy, the Targaryen dynasty might have ended right there. But although Barristan saved the king's life, he couldn't save his mind. The months of captivity had shattered something inside him. From that day forward, King Aerys II trusted almost no one, convinced that every noble house secretly wanted to overthrow or kill him. His response to Duskendale was brutal. Lord Dennis Darklyn wasn't simply executed. Almost the entire House Darklyn was wiped out. Men, women, and children connected to the rebellion were put to death. Their castle was stripped away, and their family line was virtually erased from history. The king wanted revenge, wanting to make sure no one would ever dare humiliate him again. Something else changed after Duskendale. King Aerys II became obsessed with physical security. He rarely left the Red Keep, terrified of travel and believing danger waited outside every castle wall. The man who had once dreamed of grand tours now barely left his own chambers. The Iron Throne had become his prison. His appearance became even more disturbing. He stopped cutting his hair, refused to trim his beard, and his fingernails grew until they curled like claws. Some servants feared getting too close because the king would scratch people during angry outbursts, as if he wanted the outside of his body to reflect the chaos inside his mind. His cruelty also reached terrifying new heights. Executions became spectacles. Burning people alive became entertainment for the king, who believed fire was pure and revealed truth. He would watch prisoners scream as wildfire consumed them, with some accounts describing him smiling. Fear now ruled the Red Keep far more than respect ever did. Even his own Kingsguard had to be careful, secretly wondering whether they might become his next victim. Every audience became unpredictable, as he might reward you one day and accuse you of treason the next over a harmless comment. The palace became suffocating, and King Aerys II became increasingly isolated. Tywin Lannister was losing patience. Prince Rhaegar spent more time away from court, and many nobles avoided King's Landing entirely. The king interpreted their absence as proof of conspiracy, but in reality, they were simply afraid of him. By now, the realm had started whispering a new name across taverns and castles, the Mad King. But the greatest tragedy was still waiting. While the king's mind continued to unravel, Prince Rhaegar was becoming more admired than ever before. Soon, all of Westeros would gather for the tourney at Harrenhal. By the early years of King Aerys II's reign, almost everyone could see that the king was unstable. His closest friend had become his greatest rival, and his own son was becoming the hope of the realm. Many lords concluded that if anyone could save House Targaryen, it was the prince. On the surface, Harrenhal was simply the greatest tournament ever held, drawing knights from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. Even King Aerys II made the journey, despite rarely leaving the capital. But many historians believe powerful lords wanted to meet in secret to discuss what should be done about the king, and some think Prince Rhaegar himself intended to gather support to peacefully replace his father. King Aerys II certainly believed it, viewing every conversation as betrayal. Then came the moment everyone remembers. After winning the tournament, Prince Rhaegar rode past his own wife, Princess Elia Martell, and placed the crown of winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark, naming her the Queen of Love and Beauty. The entire crowd was stunned. No one realized they were witnessing the beginning of the end, because whatever truly happened between them afterward, it would eventually ignite Robert's rebellion. When Lyanna disappeared with Prince Rhaegar, her eldest brother, Brandon Stark, rode straight to King's Landing and demanded the crown prince come out and face him. To the Mad King, this was treason. Brandon Stark was arrested immediately. King Aerys then ordered Brandon's father, Lord Rickard Stark, to come to King's Landing to answer for his son's crimes. Rickard believed there would be a trial, but instead, he walked into one of the most horrifying executions in history. The king declared fire as the champion of House Targaryen. Rickard Stark was suspended above a massive fire, slowly roasted alive in his heavy armor, while Brandon was brought in with a rope around his neck. A sword was placed just out of reach. The harder Brandon struggled to reach it to save his father, the tighter the rope became, until he slowly strangled himself. That single act shocked the Seven Kingdoms. The king had murdered two great lords in one of the cruelest ways imaginable. Instead of trying to calm the situation, he made it worse by demanding that Jon Arryn execute his own wards, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. Jon Arryn refused, raised his banners, and the rebellion began. As the war dragged on, the king's paranoia became absolute. When Prince Rhaegar finally returned to lead the royal army, it was already too late. At the Battle of the Trident, he faced Robert Baratheon in single combat. Robert's warhammer crashed into Rhaegar's chest, shattering the rubies on his armor, and the future of House Targaryen fell into the river with him. When news reached King's Landing, King Aerys II lost what little grip on reality he had left. He made the decision that guaranteed he would be remembered forever. If he couldn't rule King's Landing, no one would. For years, he had secretly ordered the Alchemists Guild to hide enormous caches of wildfire beneath the streets, markets, and homes of the city. His final plan was to ignite every cache when the rebels entered, burning hundreds of thousands of innocent subjects. Then came the sack of King's Landing. Tywin Lannister arrived outside the gates with a massive army. Believing his old friend had come to save him, Aerys ordered the gates opened. It was his final mistake. The Lannister army immediately turned against the city, sacking the capital. Realizing he had been betrayed, King Aerys gave his pyromancer Rossart the final command: burn them all. Fortunately, Jaime Lannister of the Kingsguard stood between the king and complete destruction. Faced with an impossible choice between his oath to the king and his oath to protect the innocent, Jaime killed Rossart before the wildfire could be ignited. He then climbed the steps to the Iron Throne. King Aerys repeated the order, but Jaime drew his sword and drove it through the king's back, ending his 21-year reign. For years, people mocked Jaime as the Kingslayer, believing he had murdered his king out of loyalty to his father rather than to save 500,000 lives. The death of King Aerys marked the end of nearly 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. Queen Rhaella fled to Dragonstone, where she gave birth to Daenerys, the daughter who would never meet her father. The ultimate tragedy is that Aerys wasn't born a monster or born mad. He began life as a prince with enormous promise, a loyal friend, and a charismatic ruler. But pride became jealousy, jealousy became paranoia, paranoia became cruelty, and cruelty eventually became madness. In trying to hold on to absolute power, King Aerys II destroyed his friendships, his family, his dynasty, and ultimately himself, leaving Westeros to remember him by only one name: the Mad King.